And we should know that marketing, broadly speaking, is about customer needs and indeed satisfying customer needs. Let's look at variables. We know that some businesses make, manufacture and supply products. Some businesses offer services. Now, in terms of products v services, in terms of marketing, we should understand that we have the 7 main areas. Taking products first, if we think about a given product, then there are 4 main areas of marketing that a company needs to think about. They need to think about the product itself, for example, features. They need to think about how they price it, for example, in relation to competitors. They need to think about how they promote it, in what sense, in what way, television, online, social media, etc. And then finally, they need to think about place. In other words, where do consumers and customers get access to that product? Is it through a retail shop? Is it online, etc.? In terms of services, slightly different. It's very, very difficult to sort of separate a service, for example, from the people that supply that service. So, in essence, people first. And indeed, outside of that, generally, when you have a service, you're going to have a series of processes. For example, in relation to a restaurant, an ordering process. Next key point, and third one, in relation to the P's, is physical evidence. So using the example that I just gave in terms of a restaurant, certainly the atmosphere in a restaurant is physical evidence. The sort of ambience is physical evidence. So in essence, when we think about products versus services in the area of marketing, we're really talking about the 7 main P's, with the first 4 relating to products and indeed the next 3 as an add-on for services. So we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail now. The area of the product itself. So when we think about a given company producing a product, that in terms of marketing, these are really the key areas. They have choices to make in terms of whether or not their product is aimed at the high quality area, choices about packaging and indeed branding and general aesthetics. Perhaps there is a mix of products that they make. How do they mix them? What are the elements? And then over and above that, in relation to this particular product that they make or manufacture, what is relevant in terms of the servicing or, a warranty, or do they provide a guarantee? So in terms of marketing, these are the key areas that an individual company will need to assess and understand in relation to their product. Next key area for us is price. Now, this is obviously key to businesses, certainly when you have a product that is in demand, pricing it properly. Now, there's several options. These are just 2. The first one here, we see penetration pricing. So a given firm could choose a penetration pricing policy. And what that means is basically a low price. So it may well be that this is a new product on the market, and the firm decides in terms of their choice on pricing stroke marketing, price low to achieve early market share advantages. People like low prices. You will gain market share by simply pricing low and indeed then move on from that tactic or policy going forward. So again, that's just one option. What about skimming? The idea of high prices early on. Perhaps it's a new, very desirable, differentiated product. It's just being introduced onto the market. If we keep prices high, we're going to reap maximum profits or maximum margins very early. And again, we can change our tactics or approach going forward. So these are just 2 options. Outside of that, when we think about price, there's a number of things that will influence a company or a firm's decision making in relation to price. These are just a few. For example, economic. Let's say that there's a recession, then maybe we need to price low. What are competitors doing? How do they do it? And we need to perhaps match them or indeed beat them. Outside of that, for example, it may well be that at this particular time of the year, discounts are a good idea. Let's discount the price. Linked into that, things like payment terms. How do customers pay? Do we allow them credit? Is there a penalty for not paying on time? Etc., etc. Last point here is life cycle. Now, note up top when we considered penetration pricing and indeed price skimming. Really, where we are in terms of the life cycle of the product is important. And we should understand in relation to PLC or product life cycle, really, products can be introduced. They can have an introduction phase. They can have a growth phase. After that, they could have some sort of maturity phase. The products have been around for a period of time and things are settling. Let's say the market isn't growing particularly rapidly. And then after that, fourth phase, generally decline. So pricing may well be tactical in the sense that we may change our policy from time to time. For example, between introduction and indeed growth, or between growth and indeed maturity. So in terms of the area of pricing and marketing, there are a number of different factors that will influence a firm's decision on how to price and at what level to price at. So we're on now to our third area. Bear with me one second. Promotion. Now remember that these first 4 P's really are relevant to all products and services, but generally the first 4 associated with products only. So in terms of promotion, firms have a consideration as to how to promote, how to advertise, a number of different possibilities with different costs attached to each one. Outside of that, it may well be at different times of the year that some sort of sales promotion takes place. As I said up top, perhaps at Christmas time, maybe we'll be looking at discounts. Linked into that is the whole area of public relations and indeed getting information out to the public. For example, a press release for a new launch. Linked into promotion, perhaps we have a sales team. Perhaps we sell directly to the public. How are these sales teams trained, as an example? So that's promotion. Next area for us is place. In other words, where. Where and how do consumers and customers get access to this particular product? What decisions do we make in relation to that? So the first area really to consider is logistics. The idea that really we need to look to divide the market, broadly speaking, into groups now. And indeed, those groups may act in a different way. So understanding how they act and what their needs are is certainly relevant in terms of our logistics, how we get the product to them, how they will react if the product is in such and such a place. In relation to the channel side, what are channels? Really when we think about channels, we're talking about speed. We're talking about the idea of how quickly we can get a product to a particular customer. Several approaches here are possible. The first one, when we think about a product, is really product push. The idea that we push the product out, regardless of the consumer, out to distributors. And we say, here you are, stock these products. Customers will come in due course. Flip side of that really is customer. The idea that, we do activities to persuade the customer to demand the product from retailers and indeed distributors, in effect, pulling the product through the chain. So they're both sort of equal and opposite in one sense. Next area for us is people. So here we're sort of moving in, aren't we, to the area of the provision of a service. First 4 we looked at, broadly speaking, sort of product related. But when we think about a service, Let's think about it. I use the example of a restaurant. People are important. Their appearance, their dress, their attitude, their behavior, their professionalism. These are important areas and all part of this marketing mix. We need to have, for example, well-trained waiters, a well-trained maitre d'. Outside of that, other sort of skills areas important. Now, how knowledgeable are they of the menu of the food? How committed are they? And how much discretion do they have? So this area of people really pertains to not just what we see of the people, for example, a waiter in a restaurant, but also their attitude and indeed some soft skills as well. Linked into that next area on services is really the processes. In other words, the processes associated with that particular service. And that could be anything from a sort of a policy or possibly some sort of automation or mechanization. It could be something to do with, let's say, a booking or a booking service, perhaps online via a website. And indeed, outside of that, perhaps the ease, is there queuing? Does the process, whatever it is, does it take a long time? Is the process glitchy in some way in a software sense? So again, these are areas, the various processes that make up the provision of this service are key to its success. Last area, physical evidence. Again, using the restaurant example, the environment, the atmosphere, the general vibe of the restaurant may well be absolutely crucial. For example, layout, the noise, ambience, etc. Outside of that, when we think of things like airlines, certainly the facilities available, and indeed outside of that, perhaps the uniforms or clothing worn by staff. In addition to that, when we think of physical evidence, we're talking about things really that consumers and customers can see. They're very, very evident immediately. Things like labeling or logos or indeed packaging. These are key to a marketing sort of element, or indeed the success of marketing for a business. Okay?